Hello again, and this is going to be the last lesson I do on this software. We're going to finish up what we need to do on synthesis. Of course, if you want to sort of continue experimenting with this, then definitely go ahead. I think it's a really good thing to do. But I understand it's really quite complex, so if you don't do anything more than just follow what I'm doing on these tutorials, that's absolutely fine. So today we're going to have a look at LFO. So we have done this briefly before, but we're going to look into it a bit more detail today. So we're going to look at, we're going to sort of talk about what an LFO is, and also how we can add one to this basic default patch in the rack software. So LFO, as you may already know, stands for low frequency oscillator. And what that means is, but when it says low frequency, it really does mean low frequency. We're talking about waveforms which are below the human hearing threshold. So therefore, they're typically below 20 hertz. We don't hear the LFO in this. Well, we can't hear frequencies that low, but even if we could, we wouldn't be hearing it directly. Because the sound's not, the oscillator's not sort of feeding into the output of the synthesizer. Instead, we're using the shape of the waveform it creates to control something else, and this is called modulation. So you're modulating something else using that waveform shape. So we can change the rate of the waveform, so changing the frequency to get sort of faster or slower effects. So we can use LFOs to do things like tremolos, vibratos, to create some cool effects, basically. So first of all, though, we've got to do our usual things in the software, which is setting up our audio. So you're probably sick and tired of doing this by now, but I'll go through it again each time just in case. So core audio and audio 8 over here. And then you need to select your output, either your audio interface. I'm using built-in output so I can record in Logic. And then I'm going to set up my keyboard. So at the moment it's set to be the computer keyboard, but I want it to be core MIDI. And I want to use my MIDI keyboard, which is the Eddie roll. So now I should, hopefully. Yep, good, I've got sound. Fantastic. Right, the next thing we're going to do is going to add my LFO. So I'm not going to change anything at the moment. I'm going to keep everything as the basic default, but I'm going to right click, and if you come over here, I've got LFO, oh sorry, not VCO, LFO one just here. There's a second one as well, which is, I haven't actually looked at that one yet. So let's have a look at the LFO one because it's the one I'm familiar with. So I'm going to put it over here. And one of the first things I'd like to do is add another scope so we can see specifically what this oscillator is doing. So right click, find the scope, and put that next to it. So let's take, so you got at the bottom of the LFO, got your familiar waveforms, same as the VCO, sine, triangle, sawtooth, and square. So if I take my sine and put it into X in on the scope, you see at the moment you're just going to get this weird line. Because these are very, very slow. There we go. Now I can actually see something that looks sensible when I turn up the frequency. Because these are very slow waveforms, we need to turn the time right down so we can you can see what's going on. So now you can see it's drawing a really slow sine wave. So that's obviously way slower than what we could hear. But we can use this ramp, this shape it's creating, to create some cool effects. So it's a bit like in Logic, you might use automation to control, to do some like rises and falls and certain effects. This is kind of just doing it automatically for you. It's like creating that automation shape all the time without you having to manually sort of do it with a dial or draw it or whatever. So that's effectively what's happening here. So that's quite handy to have this scope to see what's going on there. So the first thing I wanted to do was to control amplitude with the LFO. So using this to just control the volume up and down. So to do that, I'm going to remove this green patch here, cable here, and instead I'm going to join that up with my sine wave here. So now, can you follow what's going on this scope here? So it's turning the volume up and down slowly in the shape of that sine wave. It's because I've basically told this LFO what I'm doing effectively with this LFO is just turning the volume up and down automatically. So if I increase the frequency here, so then I get that. So that's like creating a tremolo. That's what tremolo is. It's fluctuations in dynamics. So it's creating a tremolo effect. So that's pretty cool. So I'm just going to remove that here. So now I can remove that as well. Let's try doing the same thing, but this time with a sawtooth. So put the sawtooth in here. Let's turn the frequency down a bit. So now I can see I'm generating this sawtooth shape. And I'm going to put that into my mixer, into the CV1. So you can hear that slow rise and then sudden fall back down to 0 again, which is following that shape. So let's go even slower now, so it's more obvious. So then again, follow what's going on let's go a bit faster, a little bit faster now. Follow what's going on this screen, and then and sort of follow the volume. You can hear it. There's even like a click when it suddenly goes down to 0 again. Excellent, very good. And then if we do, let's just do one more with this. Let's do square wave. So let's put the square wave into this scope to see. There it is. So it go. Basically, square wave is just on or off. So you have either sound or no sound in this case. So oh, I haven't connected it up. Silly old me. Right, there we go. So you can hear that it's just turning effectively turning it the mixer, the volume on and off. So if I whack that up a bit faster, so you can hear now it's creating like a rhythm, like a automatically generating a rhythm, if you like. Okay, let's disconnect those. So that's I'm just going to, what was I connected up to before? I was connected up from the output of this, wasn't it? So it controls the envelope, controls this as well. Okay, so that's using the LFO to control dynamics, volume. So now it's a really common thing it gets used for is controlling the filter. So instead of fluctuating the volume up and down, it's controlling this cutoff frequency point. So that can create some nice sort of swelling, moving sound. So what we're doing here is trying to create. We've got very basic sounds generated from synthesizers. They sound a bit bland and boring on their own. So we're trying to sort of make things more interesting by doing all these modulations and making the sound evolve over time. So let's use the sine wave, and let's go into we can't do that yet. So at the moment, the output of the envelope is going into the controlling the filter. So I'm going to remove that cable there. Put my sine wave into the filter. Again, I'm going to hook up this so I can see, slow it down a bit. There we go. So, got my LFO sine wave going into the filter. Here now it's kind of creating swells. And I can change the position of the cutoff frequency, and that will give you, that's basically changing how much of the effect we hear now. So if I'm sort of midway, you can hear it's just sort of swelling the higher frequencies. It just gives you a little bit of the effect. But yeah, if we go all the way down here, you hear it swelling all the way from cutting off all the frequencies all the way up to the top. So that can sound quite cool if we have quite a fast, especially if we're in a bit slower than that. Start to create almost like dubstep sort of wobbly bass lines, especially if you change the frequency. So that's quite nice. So that's using the sine wave. Again, let's try it again. Let's do the square wave. So hook that up in there so we can see our square wave. Frequency hooked up to the square wave. So again, it's creating that sort of rhythm, if you like, with the square wave, because you've only got sort of on or off.